Hi there, you're watching Grumpy Opinions. Just before we go any further, I would like to make a small note just to say that obviously, like everybody else, I heard the terribly sad news that Sinead O'Connor passed away last week. Well, I was never a huge super fan of her. I did like the music that she made that I heard, and I just thought I'd note that here obviously because she sang this season's opening credits. R.I.P. Sinead, my thoughts go out to her family and friends. Outlander is a show now in its 7th season telling the story of Claire and Jamie Fraser and his kids Brianna and William. And there's a lot of time travel and other shenanigans and wars that all get tied up in the mix. Episode 707, a practical guide to time travel, starts out where last week left off, with Roger dragging the Knuckle of E back inside the house and telling Bree very pointedly that he's actually Buck Mackenzie. But rather than putting the creepy interloper down and burying him in the crawl space, which you'd probably expect, they make him sandwiches and coffee and give a nice big dram of whiskey while he recounts how he came back to Scotland in 1778 and heard the call of the Stones from Cragnadoon. Then when he saw Roger in 1980's Inverness, he followed him home and has been watching them ever since. And because we appear to be in bad sitcom land now, Horny Foreman turns up unexpectedly for his dinner that night as well, and they have to scramble to keep him occupied while Bucky Rogers hides in the pantry cupboard. Luckily, Foreman is so into Roger, I mean into his Gaelic songs, that Roger ends up leaving him alone in the study. But then the kids arrive before he can get rid of Buck. Oh, the hilarity. And the ruse seems to have worked, and Horny's almost a friend of the family by the end of dinner, but he just will not leave, asking for yet another dram and then unloading about his ex-wife and his son. But finally he goes, and then Bree and Roger look and find that Buck's vanished. However, it turns out he's actually just in the caravan, literally watching Buck Rogers with the kids. And that's fine, I suppose, no one seems to care. And Bree ends up taking him to work with her the other day rather than just giving him some money and sending him to the pictures. And he ends up meeting Horny Foreman and immediately takes a big dislike to him because he's a bit handsy with Bree, and he tells Roger all about it. But Roger and Bree just laugh it off and then sex themselves silly. Next night though, Mandy wakes up screaming and says that Jemmy's gone, but he's supposed to be off on a sleepover with Foreman's nephew, only turns out he's actually not. It's all been a nonsense and he's been kidnapped by Foreman, so they rush off to the Stones and they find Jemmy's scarf beside the buzzing rocks. Oh no. Meanwhile, back in 1777, Claire's chilling in camp, positively cheerful while they wait for the Battle of the Saratoga to kick off. And amidst some spectacle J parade, Jim mentions that he's off to fight, so he gathers all his gear, kisses his missus goodbye, and then, in a big extravagance of slow motion, which can only mean that they don't have any more scenes together this episode, he heads off. William, on the other hand, is hanging out with Sergeant Niceman, who's plainly going to die.
Spot the stiff.
Spot the stiff.
Which characters are not going to make it to the end of the film?
And the pair of them nick some booze and food and end up leaving an important meeting. And William isn't for an easy life, so he ends up asking Robert the Bruiser to let him fight on the front line, and Bob agrees. And then once they're on the field, they're chatting about girls and boobs and stuff, and then bang, a shot rings out and kills Niceman stone dead. And after that, Willie gets battle rage, and then it's a slaughter. But afterwards, he isn't above making sure that the dead get properly buried. And then out in the field of battle, one of the bodies lying there is Jamie. End of episode. So what did I think? Well, this week managed to do some decent stuff. The Guess Who's Coming to Dinner scenes were all done in an appreciable sitcom squirmy way with enough of the farcical element of having to hide Buck in a cupboard and trying not to let slip anything's wrong. This kind of thing, it's tried and tested, it works, I've seen it done better, I've seen it done worse. It's fine. Although I do think some stuff was a little bit too on the nose, like Foreman being left in the room with the notes was a pretty fair setup, especially with the detail of that letter being hastily trapped in the lid later on. But it was a bit weird that Roger made the point of moving the box really obviously in one of the scenes for no apparent reason. But it's fine. It's also really funny looking back at all this stuff. You forget that things like, it was totally normal in the 1980s to drink and drive in Britain. I mean, hell, borderline mandatory. But yeah, it was all pretty good, clean fun, apart from that. And also, I don't dislike the guy playing Buck. Although, he does seem like a bit of a different character now. More on that later. And yeah, you know what, I like war stuff, so it's nice to get a bit of a battle, even though if it looked like a bit of a battle, as in literally a little bit of a battle, which kind of reminds me a little bit of the old Sharp TV shows where they only had about 20 extras and 10 horses and they were always trying to do massive battles and it was really obvious they only had a few guys and it only occasionally worked. But this felt less like the Battle of Saratoga and more like the minor skirmish of fence post and edge of field. That might be how it really panned out, that might be what the real place looks like, I have no idea. But I kind of end up feeling like this should have been some big, huge thing. But anyway, maybe the next part will, because they did say battle number 1. So yeah, this was fine, and I liked William digging the graves at the end. It's nice, it feels suitably heroic, it shows that he cares about his men and he's not above getting his own hands dirty when he needs to. But I find it hard to take it seriously on this show when it has like an impromptu underwritten scene of Jamie walking off to war in slow motion, when to be honest, he's been going off to war and off to battles for ages in loads of previous episodes, but clearly the show wants to make a big deal of it and it makes it really obvious. But I didn't feel like any of the build-up to this particular scene actually felt like it was build-up to something serious, because, look, they're not going to kill Jamie off, we know that. And that's not a huge issue. I'm a bit confused, because isn't he supposed to be a sniper? And snipers usually snipe from far away, rather than run into the middle of it. And I know they said, oh no, we just found out this thing from this deserter, and now we've got to actually gear up and go for it. But it just felt like it was a bit unclear. Also, like, this dude, he had Spot the Stiff written all over him. But yeah, from scene 1 of this episode, hell, even slightly from the scene last week, it seemed like they were like counting down the seconds till this guy got obviously dead. Although I did expect that he would actually probably get killed by Jamie. And speaking of making things a bit too obvious, Horny Foreman's kidnap turn was a surprise. I did not see that coming. But him rooting through the letters and all that kind of stuff, that was a bit too obvious. As I said, Roger moving the box onto the table, but then showing that box again and again and again, but him not noticing right up until the moment, and then suddenly the scream, it was a little bit too on the nose. And I know you're probably supposed to suspect Buck in that scene, but then he turns out to be Mr. Nicey Nice. And speaking of that, considering they lit him like this last week, which actually made him look like he had a broken nose or something, and he looked far more sinister and dangerous, now you see him, he looks kind of like a sweet and kind guy. He looks far more like Rupert remember Rupert from seasons 1 and 2? He looks more like him than he looks like Dougal. He just does not remind me of this guy. Maybe what really went on in Castle Leigh, we'll never know. But I get that the show has to do a show, but I feel like Roger forgiving the guy who had him literally hanged last season, I don't think that's realistic. It smacked of, well, we have to justify them not being enemies and at each other's throats constantly, so fine. So Roger punched him a couple of times and then forgave him because he's a good Christian man or something. It just stretched credulity in a way that the show doesn't always do like this, and it felt like it was doing it a bit badly. Other than that, little nitpicks. The scene with the two driving the car looked really bad, like, just really fake. And the usual thing with kid actors, look, kids will look at the camera if they're wee kids. It's forgivable. But that's really all I have to say in complaint. Yeah, even I'm surprised about that. So that's us only one episode from the mid-season finale and another mini Droughtlander. And apparently there's going to be another super mini Droughtlander because it's 2 weeks until the next episode. And then we find out that Jamie's fine. I mean, if he's fine. You know what I mean. Anyway, I can't help feeling that things are a little bit thin, events are happening a bit too fast, there's not room to breathe, and frankly, I can't see one more episode fixing this, because it'll probably be a cliffhanger because it's the end of a mid-season break. And the last time we had a mid-season break, it finished up with Blackjack Randall capturing Claire and Jamie bursting through the window. So yeah, the week was alright, to be honest. They're failing to balance the storylines brilliantly between the 1770s and 1980s, and again, I think that's probably a problem caused by cutting out wee subplots and stuff that fill out a book but overcomplicate a TV show. And yeah, while I'm enjoying it better than Season 6, it's not by a massive amount. So, brief review this week. But until next time, in 2 weeks' time, these have been my grumpy opinions.